Well, welcome everyone to our 14th TIA Centre seminar of the academic year. And today I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Professor Peter Boor. Professor Peter Boor received his medical and scientific training at the medical schools of Bratislava in Slovakia and Aachen, Germany. He is the chair of translational nephropathology and senior consultant pathologist at the Institute of Pathology at RWTH Aachen University. He also leads the electron microscope facility and digital pathology and is the RWTH lecturer. His research group, the Laboratory of Nephropathology, focuses on diagnostic biomarkers with a particular focus on imaging, digital pathology, and AI, as well as in vivo animal modeling and understanding pathological processes. His scientific work encompasses more than 340 original papers, reviews, and editorials, and several book chapters. And the title of Peter's talk today is Towards Ecologically Sustainable AI for Pathology. And thanks again, Peter, for joining us. And when you're ready to start, please feel free to go for it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the very kind introduction and also invitation to talk to you on the topic we now started to work on, because we believe that it might be meaningful to think about the consequences of what we do in medicine. So I wanted to show you where I work. Actually, this is the University Clinic Aachen. It indeed does not look as University Clinic. I have to say I don't use TikTok, but I have been told that there is a top 10 on TikTok of the most ugliest university clinic buildings in the world, and it seems that our university clinic made it to top 10. And the pathology, as in every bad or good horror movie, is indeed in the cellar, in the back of the university clinic. But as you can see, I still have daylight in my office, at least, although I'm in the cellar. So this is where we are and where we work. So I will maybe just very shortly talk about pathology, because all of you work in this field. So of course, we as pathologists look at tissue and cell samples from all organs, and we use microscopy. And microscopy, in a way, how we will be using, remained the same for now over 150 years. So maybe the design of the microscope looked a little bit and changed a little bit, but at the end, the optics and so on is largely the same, and this is what we have been using. So what we do, and again, you don't need that much introduction, as you were all working in pathology. We're actually diagnosing diseases so that we know how a normal tissue should look like, and then we try to understand how pathological alterations look like on a slide, and do a diagnosis out of that then decides what patients has and how he should be managed afterwards. And there is a huge amount of information in these slides, even though it's might seem as a simple picture. What I find really nice is that actually you can think about the work of pathologists doing similar thing as you can do, or your children might be doing, just finding the 10 differences. Okay, we can do some more interpretation on this, but in principle, it is like this: to pinpoint and find the pathological alterations, give it a name. And we're actually pretty well paid for this job, to looking at pictures all the day. So if any one of you wants to change the job, we have so many open positions. Pathology is really a good possibility. So this is what I meant, is that the workflow in the analog pathology was similar now for more than 150 years. We look at the tissue, we do these slides, look under the microscope, do our diagnosis. But recent developments, and you probably know this very well, enable now high throughput digitization of pathology workflow. So that means that we don't have to look at the slides on the microscope, but we have these high throughput scanners that will digitize the histology, and then we can actually start working well similar to radiologists, having all the images in digital form. And then working and looking at the monitor. And then, of course, having all digital opens the possibility of using any kind of computer-based image analysis, and particularly AI-based analysis. And this digital pathology also enables a very important thing, which I will not be talking today, but that's telepathology, that you are more or less independent of the place where you work. What is important, I think, to tell is that indeed this high throughput digitization only enables effective use of deep learning. So this was a prerequisite which really kicked off the interest and research in this area. But what I would like to stress at this point already is that digitization is costly to acquire and maintain. So maybe you still see this is my microscope. I don't see it. So I still have an analog microscope. And this microscope is now 30 years old. And I need to change the bulb for approximately €5 every 5 years. That's the maintenance I need now. But if we have full digital workflow, we need hardware for digital slides and viewing for actually approximately €1 million that needs to be renewed every 4 years because it is embedded within the IT infrastructure of our university clinic. And since it's certified, we have to change the hardware every 4 years so that it's not too old. So this is just the hardware. That's not the scanners. That's not the software. So this is actually very exciting, but we should also think about the costs that this digitization brings with itself and all the electronic waste that we have on top of what we do now, and hardware required and so on and so on. So probably you know this very well. I believe that every single task that the pathologist does can be potentially automatized using AI and deep learning. And just one example I want to show you how this works, the classical classification tasks. So here one task where you can take a H&E stain, here is colorectal cancer, and you can predict molecular alteration of this tumor, which is the so-called microsatellite instability or stability. And this is essential for further patient management. What I would like to highlight was the last supplementary figure of this paper, and this is the current workflow that we have. So we get the specimen, we do our H&E, and then we decide, and actually we should do a molecular pathology analysis to analyze whether this tumor has this molecular alteration in each patient. And this is, we calculated it for the US. These are the costs and duration. Now, if you think about digital pathology, if you scan the slide and then run such a tool, this would be the duration and this would be the cost per patient. So back then I thought, well, I don't think that it's a question whether AI will come to medicine, but it's just question when and how. What I wouldn't have thought is that the first commercial product came less than 3 years after the first publication of this tool. So the translation in this area is immensely fast. And I do believe, furthermore, that it's not anymore a question if, but it's just a question when and how we will be using deep learning in medicine. There is also another approach. So what we all do have to do sometimes is not just use these end-to-end deep learning, but for example, this is a kidney histology. Kidney is responsible for filtering your blood, and the filter where your blood is filtered is here. This is called a glomerulus. This is actually very fascinating. It filters 120 liters of blood and produces 120 liters of primary urine every day. And you just pee 1 liter. So then all these tubules take back all what you need to survive. And also, this filter never clogs if you're healthy. And think about your coffee filters. How long do they last if you use them? So this is really fascinating structures, and they are very susceptible to disease. So we often have to look at these specific areas of the kidney. But look here, these are the small dots. So it's much less than 10% of the area of the whole kidney that we have to focus on. And there where deep learning also comes to. So what I had to do, and this is just 10 years ago, I had to if I was interested what happens in the glomeruli, I had to manually outline them. And this is, look here, I did it 2012. So I had to manually outline 43,000 glomeruli. That was not a funny job. And back then I asked some people from Image Vision whether it's not possible to automatize this. It was 2012, so that was around 2-3 years after deep learning really came out. And they told me, yes, it is, but actually it's cheaper to hire a student back then. than to devise a model for that. The problem was that I was the student, so it didn't help me, but it actually motivated me um, to do this. And now it was actually, you see here, this was like 7 years later. It is the opposite. Now it doesn't make sense to hire a student, but it's much better, easier, and more sustainable to develop a deep learning model, because that not only will outline the glomeruli here in blue, but it will outline every other thing in your image precisely, reproducibly. And let's be honest, it does not need to be paid. It never goes to parties. It never gets ill. And if you have backup copy, it will never leave your lab. So this is very important, and I believe it shows how this will change also quantitative pathology in that we will need. So now we really can take a human kidney biopsy, as shown here. We can segment it into each of the specific relevant instances that are relevant for diagnosis. And now we can take each single of this instance, which is biologically relevant, and start analyzing it. So, for example, how big these instances are, because they get, for example, bigger if they're diseased. So this is what I believe is another approach, and very important approach for pathology, the large-scale quantitative pathology that we call pathomics. So this is all what we have this unbelievable potential of deep learning in pathology. And this is a graph that will show you why I believe it's, again, not a question whether we will get AI, because this graph shows the number of pathologists in Germany, but also in Europe, per inhabitants or per physicians. So if you look here, there is only one country that has worse numbers of pathologists per inhabitants than Germany, that's Poland. So we have such a lack of pathologists that we probably are, we are at the level where you cannot even maintain the standard level of care, because we have such a lack of people. So let's just does anyone see it? Where is, so I don't see actually great. Oh yeah, here somewhere in the midfield you are at the better place. So it will be maybe a bit harder to sell AI in UK, because you still have quite some pathologies here. But again, this is actually the critical area, and there are some few that are really well equipped, but I haven't seen any country where this trend would be improving. So I believe this one shows us that just, with pathology getting more complex, more cases with less pathologies, we need support tools to tackle these approaches. Okay, you certainly know this hype cycle for emerging technologies, whatever it was, whether it was sequencing, whole genome, proteomics. We always at the beginning think that all our problems will be tackled by this technology. And this is kind of the peak of the inflated expectations. And then we start realize that there are some problems and we need to really tackle them to make it really, really work. And I do believe that with deep learning, we are still somewhere here. And that is where we started to think, well, we know that this happens with every technology. So why not start thinking about this already from the beginning and then maybe make this work? So I believe there are lots of challenges that we need to tackle. And what I wanted to talk to you today is just one small piece of the puzzle and aspect that we would like to highlight, and that's ecological sustainability. So why did we actually thought about this? And this was a one graph that you can Google, or you could Google back then. It's pretty old, but it shows you the carbon footprint of, for example, a flight here, San Francisco, New York, a human life, very interesting, American life in comparison, US car, and here a transformer neural architecture search in a really large deep learning model. So this told us, and of course, any one of you who is developing, training, and running AI models, deep learning models, really deep learning models will understand that they are computationally highly demanding. The second thing is that we are getting digital. This is the amount and volume of data that is anticipated produced worldwide. I have to be honest, I didn't know what zettabytes are. I had to look it up. And now we are at this level, and you see that the curve is not linear really. So this kind of improves even much more. And the more data you have, the more computation you then need to really process these data. So we have two things. We have bigger, deeper model, more computationally demanding, and ever increasing amount of data. And this amount of data that is increasing is really coming mainly from healthcare. So it seems that we as healthcare are the major driver of this increase in data production per year, even compared to media and entertainment, which I wouldn't have thought. But then I think about all the omics methods that we have, getting into more precise diagnostic, it becomes clear that this is the case. So this brought us to the question, actually, and this is was published 2024. This brought us to the question: what would be the consequences of implementing deep learning in pathology on carbon footprint? And so what we did in this study to understand whether it's relevant or not, we actually looked at a complete detailed analysis of a workflow in our clinical pathology institute, analyzed the exact amounts of slides, cases, their sizes, looking at how big these cases are. And then we ran various deep learning models on exact devices and see how much energy we need, and then we calculated how much CO2 is produced by getting this electricity. And this is already something which I would like to highlight. I don't know, does any one of you need to pay his electricity bills in the university? Because we don't, and thereby we actually never thought about how much electricity we use. So these are kind of hidden costs, but I believe that if you would need to pay for your electricity for what you do, you would certainly start think about how to do it maybe better. So this is what we did. So the data that I present you are only carbon footprint of electricity used for deep learning implementation, not training. It's use of deep learning in pathology, right? So you develop the model and now you use it. It's for one type of cancer, let's say prostate cancer, and now you use it on your cases. Okay, so we really trained and tried to look at various deep learning models, small to large, and various scenarios. For example, one task per slide. That is already what we use now. Even more so, we are getting fully digital, and we will be using 5 AIs for breast cancer diagnostics beginning from this June. That already goes to somewhere here. So 5 tasks per case of breast cancer. And then we thought, okay, there is this big, huge interest in large language models, and everyone tells that they can do everything. So we tried to calculate, okay, if we would have such a large model that is capable of tackling several tasks, we call this multitask, let's also analyze that. Then we tried to extrapolate for whole Germany, because this was done for our institute. We extrapolated then for Germany, world, and potential future. And then we also tried already to think about some solutions, how to maybe reduce this carbon footprint. So this is the first figure where we actually look at the deep learning model size. You have here the parameters, and here is the carbon footprint. And this is actually what we measured on our GPUs. So these are exact numbers, and you see this is logarithmic scale. And you see that this can vary a lot based on how deep the model is. Of course, the more deeper, the more CO2 it produces, because more computation it needs. And this is, back then we had no information on any kind of large language model or large model. That's why we try to extrapolate the carbon footprint. This is also the confidence interval for the Palm, which was back then the model that also could analyze images. So probably this would now be possible to do in a different way, but this was just a calculation so that you understand. And you already see that there is a big gap in number of parameters, but also big gap in the CO2. The second thing what makes a lot of difference is what kind of hardware you use, and you probably know this very well. But I want to highlight, you see all GPUs are by far better than CPUs. However, in our university clinic, in clinical routine, we don't have a single GPU. So we only, if we have computational resources, it's for CPU. So to make it sustainable, we would also need to kind of get GPUs, and even within the GPUs, there is a difference in how performative they are. Again, logarithmic scale. And then we kind of calculated these results, and I would just highlight this one. So this is the multitask scenario where we would use one large model to analyze each case of our Institute of Pathology in here in Aachen. And if we would do that, we would produce 2,800 tons of CO2 per year just for the electricity to run the model on each case in our institute. This again would consume approximately 30% of the forest in Aachen and surrounding to sequester this amount of CO2. And then just by running deep learning, that doesn't count for people coming by car to the work, right? But what you can also see here, look at the tremendous difference. If we would use small models, this is a factor of 10 to 2, which you can kind of reduce how much CO2 would produce. So then we try to extrapolate to try to understand how much cases we do in Germany. So for Germany for 1 year, it would be probably around 400 kilotons of CO2. And again, you see the immense difference between 7 tasks of even a large deep learning model versus a kind of something like a large language model. And then world, of course, again, extrapolation, but there one would get at 16 megatons of CO2 if we would really run one model on each potential case in the world. And I believe that these calculations are by far down tuned. So because we mainly used cancer statistics to understand potential number of cases. So what we then did is try to think about projections for the future. So we started the study in 2019, so and calculated, and then we calculated from then on how it might develop. We thought about 4 major variables. That is deep learning model size, the efficiency of devices, because if you have superior devices, they are more energy efficient, so they can counteract the size of the deep learning models. But then also how we get energy. Theoretically, if we would be producing green energy 100%, we don't have to talk about this, what I'm talking to you. But at least for Germany, we are now realistically not even here. The planned 1.5 and below 2, it's absolutely unrealistic anymore. And whether we get average, it's probably we rather here with coming to the renewable energy transformation in Germany. And this is very much for many countries as well. And then we look at number of cases. However, we have to tell that the number of cases does not play that much of a role, because they, even if they would increase linearly on this logarithmic scale, it didn't make that much of a difference. So if we now think about this worst scenario where we don't care and use the largest models, the worst devices, and we have the planned energy mix, we would produce in Germany more CO2 by running deep learning in pathology than the German forest can sequester by June 2027. And even if we would kind of do it on an average way, we would get there by approximately 2045. Which I don't think that that's really meaningful. However, if we would kind of put effort and think about this from the beginning, we can actually continuously reduce this for the future. Now, world has more forest than Germany, so the cutting point would be December 2032, and of course that's that's calculations. And even at average, we would be producing 12% of CO2 that world forest can sequester if we just just do the average job. So I also don't think that this is possible, because deep learning in pathology is not the only producer of carbon in the world. So what could we do? First thing, many people think about automated workflow. Pathologists want to have everything on the screen directly when he opens the case. That would for example, mean that many people try to use the whole slide image for analysis, which means 100% of all the pixels that we have here. And deep learning also analyzes all the white pixels, but they're completely irrelevant. So what we actually tried is that we tried one deep learning model that works on low resolution to select the tissue and then run the same deep learning on only the selected tissue. And using these two deep learning models produces less CO2 than running the one deep learning on the whole slide. And this is because we mostly have much less than 50% of the whole slide covered by tissue. There is also a possibility that you would, for example, this is an example of prostate cancer. So if you would just focus on the prostate cancer, then you can get even to 30% of the whole tissue, which even further significantly reduces the amount of data you process. But I'm not sure if this is meaningful because we don't know if we would be missing some information from other part of the tissue. So I believe that this might be kind of a good midway to reduce the workflow. And this is not losing anything on performance, right? So the question would be, why not do that? We are challenged in pathology. These are actually images that most deep learning model like UNED and so on were developed on, what you find in internet, you know, some nice pictures of zebras, horses, and so on. And this is radiology images. So look at the pixel size even for CT or MRI. And this is a single pathology slide. So what we are really here challenged is by this huge amount of data that we have to process. And these are currently the largest data that we produce in clinical medicine. So what could we do to reduce this? So first of all, the model size. And I have to be honest that our motivation was that we got rejected from some journals because the journals told that we were not using the most state-of-the-art model. And we thought, well, if we benchmark a model and look at this lighter model, which has much less parameters, but it, again, this is logarithmic scale. If it has tenfold less CO2, but seems to be even slightly better, why should I use the state-of-the-art? So the model size makes a lot of sense, and all of these deep learning models have lots of information that are not relevant for a specific task, and that what you can see also here with model pruning, so it can kind of take away some nodes and at least to our analysis, and we here use the a deep learning model that classifies renal cell carcinoma, so that this was an exact use case. You can actually reduce the model depth by approximately 20%, again, without reducing accuracy. Interestingly, the shallow model does not improve, and the big model even very slightly improved. Whether that's really significant, I don't know, but that's interesting. So you can actually reduce, you see, tenfold and even 20% by such approaches. Okay, so but how do we do it now? And I liked this editorial in Nature last year, where the authors told, well, light bulbs have energy ratings, so why can't AI chatbots? So indeed, you can now see when you buy a light bulb how energy efficient it is. But if you go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or BART or whatever, no one tells you how much CO2 you produce with your question, just for fun. And that, you know, having this could potentially force the industry and you know, might force the users to think, oh, I have these three I don't know, large language models, but this one is most energy efficient. Why should I use the other one? So this was actually very interesting. And also we ask ourselves, okay, we're now talking about this model development, or how should we do that? And this is what we tried to do in our last paper, is that we tried to propose a metrics for development of deep learning that just doesn't only look at performance, because this is the only thing we have been doing up till now. Look at the performance, the better performance, the better. We are medicine, we are saving lives, so everything has to be the best possible. But that's not true anymore. So what we try to do is to get performance and sustainability into one metric, and I will try to show you this. So this is how it looks like. So the sustainability is kind of valued higher than the, well, sorry, the performance. It's medicine, so we valued it higher than the sustainability, and then we did it as exponential to not have zero, and then we introduce a weighting factor. That's very important, and I will come back to that. So this is something where you can analyze both performance and carbon footprint. But then we also did this score, which we called future projection environmental sustainability performance, ASPER, we call it ASPER, where you don't only use the inference, and again, we're talking about inference mainly. So when you develop the model, you start using it. But to understand how much model produce CO2, we also want to include the training costs to understand, whether it makes sense to do a lot of training and to make a more sustainable model. And I will show you some data on that. Okay, and then we have this weighting factor. And that is something is, okay, which type of deep learning model do you develop? So if you develop a model that will decide on the treatment of a cancer patient, or will decide on intensive care, which treatment the patient will get. Well, I believe that a potential mistake of a deep learning model or reduced performance might have considerable results. And thereby we would reduce the relevance of sustainability, because this deep learning model is very important. But if you develop a deep learning model that will improve your pathology workflow, which, for example, we showed sometimes, that you could use deep learning to prioritize cases, so that when you come morning in the work, you will have the cases with cancer or, sorry, rejection, and those that have no disease, you can do in the afternoon. And then people will get the diagnosis much faster. And this deep learning does not have to be absolutely perfect, because the worst thing that would happen is that one important case you would do in the afternoon, which now happens anyhow. So in such case, you can actually prioritize a bit more sustainability, right? And put one there. Okay. So this is kind of the proposed workflow, how one could approach development of such deep learning models. So first, you of course have to know the medical task, and then you have to set the weighting factor. And this is very hard, because there is no guideline how to do this, and there are no metrics on this. And I will shortly tackle upon that. So this is certainly something which we will have to look at more in detail. And also, I'm not sure whether we will be able to do this numerically at the end, because this might be also a societal decision, which disease is important, which diagnosis, and so on. And then you can have a look also, for example, which resolution would you like to take, because that makes a difference. You then benchmark your models to select the best one based on ASPER and not just performance. And then you can further optimize your model. And then this is an interesting experiment I will talk to you. And then you can actually calculate, okay, we did this, for example, RCC model, and now we run the RCC model on our cases. And let's just see how much CO2 we would produce when we run this model. Okay. So one thing that we could do, and what we tried, is that you can use different types of resolution and sizes of the pictures that you input. And if you look here, and this is the CO2. So of course, the highest resolution produces also most CO2, and thereby it has the least ASPER, right? Because this is ASPER based on CO2 and AUROC as performance. But then you also see that the best performative was here, 224 pixels and 256 micrometers. So that was slightly better than the first one, because the performance was better and the CO2 was comparable. So the CO2 is worse, but the performance is so better that the ASPER is also better. So the higher ASPER, the better. the better performance and the less carbon footprint. So you wouldn't be able to tell that just looking at carbon footprint, this one is the best, but then you compare both performance and carbon footprint and come up with this one. Okay, this is another interesting thing what we did at the end. So this is inference. So if you have a deep learning model, then normally we would put everything from the slide in the inference into the model. So 100% of the patches will go inside, and then you get your diagnosis. Here we did renal cell cancer and kidney transplant, two very different tasks. This one is very easy. This one is very hard. And what we were very surprised, if you look here, and that's inference. So it's sufficient to give some 10% of data and you get already perfect classification of renal cell cancer. And this is what I as pathologists would understand, because the cancer is heterogeneous, but if you have clear cell or papillary or chromophobe, it becomes very clear and you look at it and you know. What I wouldn't have thought is that we need some 25% of data and we already get nearly perfect inference performance in kidney transplant, which pathologically doesn't make sense because it's very focal. So the disease can be here or here or here, but we don't know. So we were very surprised that even here, the improvement in performance is really little if you put 25% or 75%. And we did just random sampling, so that was nothing like selection. So then if you look at iASPER, you see that really the peak of iASPER is here, the best performance and least carbon footprint. And indeed, somewhere around 20 to 30% of data has the best ASPER, which was very surprising. I don't know, I cannot completely explain this. And it might be interesting to see. It could be that we don't need inference of 100% of slides, but we are careful there. Okay, how could you use these metrics as examples? So we not seldom we do a quite comprehensive model benchmark. And if you do model benchmark of many models, you get these AUROC curves and these CO2 production, right? And it's really hard to select what would be the best model, because this is the best model with best performance, and this is the model with least carbon footprint. But if you use ASPER, it might be much easier to identify the one that is the best of both parameters. And I have to be honest, I would have hard times to analyze this, without such metrics. And similarly, if you have models that are very close to each other with regard to performance, it also helps you to understand which one might be better if you consider both of these parameters together and not separately. So here, one of examples. So if you would use, if you look at the literature and do some, I don't know, cancer deep learning model. So you look, the best publications are with CLAM. So let's use CLAM. So you use CLAM and then you deploy this model. This would be the amount of CO2 that you would produce. And we did this again for, I think, for the RCC group. If you now, instead of using what is best published, we'll use ASPER to evaluate which model performs best based on CO2 and AUROC, you will use a different model. And even with just this, you might say -7%, it's not that much, but it's -7%. So you would already reduce the carbon footprint by 7%. And that just doing nothing else, just using ASPER instead of only performance. And then if you would actually go with the pipeline that we suggested, which means you have to do lots of development, which also produces CO2, actually you will produce more CO2 during training, but afterwards you will actually find the best approach, which in inference, and that means, I am pretty sure we will use these tools for several years. You will actually see that you can reduce the CO2 then by 31%. And again, you see that inference is much more than training in these cases. Okay, so this was a little bit controversial, but you know, there is a nice paper which calculated how much CO2 will kill a person till 2100, the year 2100. So as we saw it, we tried to calculate how many deep learning models you can do in a certain country to kill a person, right? So yeah, it's funny, and of course we don't know whether this is true. And here you see that if you are in country which has a really good energy mix, you can do lots of deep learning models. And if you are in, where is Germany? Look here, we can do only very few. Well, actually, it's pretty large amounts of tools, but this is a calculation, right? So it doesn't mean that. And United Kingdom seems to be better than Germany, so you can do more deep learning that we can do. Okay. This is one slide that where I wanted to tell you that when we started to work on that, we realized it will not only be metrics. And this is Christina Ritchie from the UK, ethicist, who actually really suggested that the guidance of what is sustainable and unsustainable in use and development of medical AI, we will need better metrics than carbon footprint and probably even our ESPER. And she proposed in her ethical criteria to go via these three major issues: health, justice, and resource conservation. But for us as researchers, maybe also for you, it's really hard to get into this realm, which is not numerical. It's really ethical, political, societal, where we have to decide how to deal. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you, is that I hope that to make deep learning cycle work, we should actually start thinking about these issues up front to make this work directly and not go through kind of a disillusionment and have to work this up from the beginning. So this is what I wanted to show you, and I believe that we should consider ecological consequences when thinking about AI. And just because we do not pay for electricity and don't care where it comes from, doesn't mean that that can have a huge impact. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a really, really interesting talk. And with that, should we open the floor to questions? Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Peter? I want to kick us off. Just else. Oh,
I think. Hi, Peter. Thank you for the nice talk. My name is Fayaz, and I'm very grateful that you accepted our request to join us for the symposium. And
Thank you.
talk. I just have one question. So one of the factors that people are now, in terms of deep learning models, trying to do is quantization. So you actually reduce the number of bits that are being used to train a machine learning model. Have you considered that as a factor?
Could you repeat the question? I didn't understood you very well.
So you can use, for example, rather than using full precision, you can use a lower number of bits for training. And I was wondering if you had considered that or the impact of that on the carbon footprint of an algorithm.
Yeah, so currently we we haven't look that much on the training side. So because what we try to focus on is what many people probably don't know is the inference, because you have to understand the workflow of pathology to understand how much it would be used. So we try to think about ways how to develop a model that would then be much more ecologically sustainable in the inference period.
Mm-hmm.
So many people focus on training because they, you know, it's hard. It's also takes a long time. So they try to think about ways how to improve the training. And anything that would improve the training would, at the end, improve the future projection ESPER, because you will reduce also the training phase. So there are many approaches that can be considered within this area. And I believe this will be a very interesting area of research to see how to benchmark models to understand what is the best solution. Because of course, if you start benchmarking 5 models, you do 5 times more CO2 in training than if you just use one and select one. So the way how we do that makes a big difference. And what we realized is that for benchmark selection of resolution, you can just take a certain subset of training data, and thereby you don't have to do the 40 kilos of CO2 for training, but you benchmark with always 1 or 2 kilos CO2 training, then you select the one and then you train the full model on full data to have the best performance. And even this calculated together, then if you select the right model, you get at inference. So you get more in the benchmark training, much more than if you just take everything, do one clam and then go for it and publish. But then in inference, you can save up to 30% of CO2, even though you had much more at the training side.
Brilliant, thank you. So I've got a question. So it's more about the actual metric you've generated. So this it's ESPAR or EPSAR.
Yes, ESPAR,
sorry.
environmentally sustainable performance.
So yeah, I really like the idea of this as a metric, but I suppose my concern is that when it goes to clinicians or policy makers or stakeholders of some description, do you think that by using a combined metric rather than separating out sustainability versus performance, that it might somehow not pull the wool over their eyes, but it might, for instance, if there's a 10% drop in carbon emissions, fantastic, that's brilliant. But if there's also a 12% drop in accuracy by using this particular type of algorithm, then I'm sure that the policyholder, or sorry, the person that's going to accept these as algorithms is going to pick the 10% worse algorithm for sustainability. But
I think this is what, this is the first attempt to do this.
Yeah.
And again, I would take the best model probably, again, if I would decide treatment for a cancer patient. So then maybe then we should only do AUROC, because the consequences, this has to be calculated. So what is the diagnostic, the reduced performance? How does this really relate to worse outcomes in patients, and what this would mean? And maybe in some cases 10% reduced performance will not translate into such a negative consequences that we should actually produce more CO2. But this becomes, I understand this becomes hard. So I don't want policymakers to tell that we need ESPAR of 0.7 and everything else is bad. Should help you to select the best performative model. So an ESPAR should help you to start considering it, because no one did. And that's already sufficient. And then again, you can use the weighting factor. So if you have something that really, improves workflow, I would actually put sustainability to the weighting factor to 1 to have 100% sustainability, because that will have no effect on the patient, because we do it now that I get the cases and they are just randomly assigned. So these are many aspects that that come into play, and for me this shouldn't be a cutoff to make someone decide this is good or bad, but it's similar. You can buy any bulb you like, but you have the information which one is energy more efficient and which not. So if you would be, let's say, a company, then why not put such an energy rating there? And then everyone can decide, because we should know the performance of the model, the data it was trained on, and also, the energy rating, because, okay, many people let compute in cloud, but for example, we have a solution where we compute it here on site. So there we need our own infrastructure for that, and there it starts to make a lot of sense.
No, I completely agree. I think that's a really good point. And I suppose my follow-up question today is, how do we try and enforce this on, especially since all these big models are by big companies that are worth trillions of dollars now? How do we go about, enforcing it, I suppose? I
think this is a big question, and what I believe, what we try to propose in this paper is that, if you publish clinical trials, you have some questionnaire on whether you checked everything for a clinical trial. And we suggested that, for example, there is this claim AI checklist for clinical trials in AI. And for example, if we would add these questions to such a checklist for journal, it would at least, enforce people to think about it. You don't have to do that, but at least think about that, right? So that would be something from academic perspective, but this would need journals to adopt it. But that happens. That happens slowly over time. It started with clinical trials. Now this is for animal studies. And why not add for sustainability? Some journals want to know how much CO2 you kind of burned through your experiments. So this is one approach. The second approach is, of course, the most largest approach would be in regulatory bodies. If they would not only look at performance and patient safety, but also consider sustainability, because at the end, climate change is there, and if we contribute to that, we actually also, aggravate what is already happening. So that would be second approach, which could help a lot, because again, I don't say that it needs to everything follow a certain cutoff of ESPER, but it would at least bring people to think about it more. And also what we saw is that many people do not think about the inference time that much. And honestly, I don't know what would be the costs if a company would kind of run a ChatGPT-like model on digital pathology. I think no one would be able to pay for that at the end. So when you see that also for cloud providers and computation, they suggest you to use rather smaller models instead of large language models, and you will also see that you pay much less. So this could be also one approach, but that comes then to the reality of how to set up this model, right? So these are, in my opinion, some of the approaches. And then, well, try to spread the word, and maybe some of you guys might have a really cool idea what to try out. And this is, I believe, and what I'm telling is, I don't want to reduce the performance. And this is what I showed you. Using a smaller computational efficient model can even have slightly bigger performance. So there I say, why not use it? Just because a reviewer tells, oh, I use the state of the art. So this is, I believe, maybe one of the main messages there as well.
Thank you, Peter. That's a really important point. Does anyone else have any more questions they'd like to ask?
Just a quick one, if I can.
Yeah, of course.
So, Peter, in your latest work, you're comparing the carbon footprint of we move something to the cloud. Are you also considering costs, like dollar figures of in the same paper? That's a question that often comes up, and if you're already doing a study, it might be useful to answer that in the same go.
So I have to be honest with you. We also tried to do this in the first study. And we realized that it's much easier to calculate carbon footprint than the costs. Because the costs vary immensely during every day, within every week. If you have more sun, then it's much cheaper. So honestly, we now also we have a very large computational center here in Aachen. And we actually saw that probably it would be best to compute stuff only when sun is shining, because then you have the biggest green energy mix and the costs are the lowest. But we calculated the costs, but the variability to put it over 1 year was so huge that it was not helpful. And this is different in Germany, in France, in UK. So starting with this, it got so complicated that we said, let's stick with carbon footprint, and that's kind of surrogate of both computational requirements and costs. But this is other thing to do in the future, to have a look when to send the data. So in my youth, my father always told me, always use the night electricity, because night is always much more cheaper because no one using is that much. This is now completely different, right? So And if you have your own photovoltaic or this solar panels, it really changes a lot. So we tried it, I have to be honest, but the data were so highly variable that we really didn't know how to calculate them. But I think this will be one interesting aspect which we want to also focus on, how to post jobs in high volume data centers, how to make it efficient when and how, because I think I heard that your data center is operational 100% green or something like that. Is that correct? So that's fantastic if that's true. I don't know how that's possible. I will just tell you that our university claims to be carbon neutral, but then I realized that they are buying CO2 certificates to get this. So the one thing is what now people put on paper as a stamp for something and what's the reality. So it can be that a center that is really fully green and also during the night and when there is no wind and where is no sun, that's really cool. And then you don't have to consider this. But the moment you develop something for someone who doesn't have this luxury, and there are many centers like that, then it becomes very relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Peter. I think we're coming up to the 3 o'clock mark. So has anyone got any final burning questions they'd like to ask?
Small one.
Okay, we've got a question from Mark.
So you mentioned you looked at the effect of the GPU on efficiency.
Yes.
So I was wondering if that was just including like just the raw kind of architecture of the GPU, or whether that included also the batch size you could fit on the GPU, because obviously the batch size has a significant effect on how efficient your inference is.
So we try to use the carbon tracker software to really understand how much electricity and computation we need when we run the exact deep learning model on these GPUs, because we have them in our lab. So we use that what we had in our lab. I have to be honest, we are not hardware researchers, so we just looked very broadly on what we had available, and what I realized that we don't have a single GPU. So I think this is just the starting point. But when talking to NVIDIA, I realized that there might be so many things that we can even improve also on the hardware side in the future, which I believe even NVIDIA had in their systems, but they actually they stopped the possibility to change it for the users or something like that. So I believe there is lots of open questions there as well, how to even further improve this on the hardware side.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And I think with that then, Peter, I think we'll call the seminar to a close. Thank you so much. That was really interesting and a really important topic at the moment as well, especially with, well, a lot of countries not necessarily focusing on sustainability as much as they probably should be at the moment. So thank you. And a reminder to everyone else that our next talk will be on Monday, the 28th of April, where we're joined online by Dr. Theodore Zhao from Microsoft Research. So hopefully see you all then. And I know the Frontiers in Computational Pathology special session deadline had passed a couple of weeks ago, but there's still time to submit some work as an abstract if anyone is interested. And the deadline for that is Monday, the 12th of May. But thanks again, Peter, and thanks again, everyone online and in person. And yeah, see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.